The sun beat down on the valley of Elah. It was a place of rolling hills and golden fields. A shallow valley cut through the land. On two opposing hills, two armies faced each other. The air crackled with tension. On one side stood the Israelites, God's chosen people. They were brave warriors, but fear shadowed their faces. Their enemies, the Philistines, had challenged them. This was no ordinary battle. The Philistines were a powerful and fierce people. They had chariots and iron weapons. They were known for their cruelty. The Israelites were outnumbered and outmatched. Their fate seemed uncertain. The outcome of this battle would determine their freedom. From the Philistine ranks strode a giant of a man. His name was Goliath. He stood over 9 feet tall. His armor gleamed in the sun. He carried a massive spear and a heavy sword. His voice boomed across the valley like thunder. Goliath roared a challenge. He dared the Israelites to send out their best warrior. He would fight this champion one-on-one. The winner would decide the fate of both armies. Day after day, Goliath repeated his challenge. Day after day, the Israelites trembled in fear. No one dared to face this terrifying giant. Far away in Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David tended his father's sheep. David was known for his courage. He had killed lions and bears to protect his flock. He was also known for his faith in God. David believed that God would protect him from any danger. One day, David's father sent him to the valley of Elah. His brothers were fighting with the Israelite army. Jesse, David's father, wanted news of the battle. He was worried for his sons. David took some bread and cheese for his brothers. He set off on his journey, unaware of the destiny that awaited him. David approached the Israelite camp. He could hear the noise of the Philistine giant even before he saw him. Goliath's voice echoed across the valley. Each word was a hammer blow against the hearts of the Israelites. "What are you doing there? Lined up for battle?" Goliath taunted. "I am a Philistine champion, but you are all Israelite slaves. Choose a man and send him to fight me." His laughter echoed off the hillsides. "If he is able to kill me, we Philistines will be your slaves. But if I defeat him and kill him, you will be our slaves." Goliath paused, letting his words sink in. His gaze swept over the Israelite ranks, searching for any sign of defiance. He sneered, "What are you waiting for? Send out your champion. Or are you all cowards, content to live as slaves?" David saw the fear etched on the faces of the Israelite soldiers. They looked like sheep facing a wolf. David approached a group of soldiers. "What's happening?" he asked. "Who is that giant? Why doesn't someone fight him?" One of the soldiers recognized David. "You're Jesse's son," he said. "What are you doing here? This is no place for a shepherd boy." Another soldier spoke up, his voice hushed. "That's Goliath, the Philistine champion. He's been challenging us for weeks. No one dares to face him." The soldiers told David about the terms of Goliath's challenge. They described Goliath's size and strength. They spoke in whispers, afraid even to say his name aloud. They had lost all hope. David listened intently, his brow furrowed. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could the Israelites, God's chosen people, cower before this Philistine giant? "Is that all?" David asked. "Is that all it will take to defeat this Philistine and save Israel? Surely someone will fight him." The soldiers looked at David as if he were mad. "You don't understand," one of them said. "This Goliath is a giant. He's as strong as a bear and twice as fierce." David shook his head. He couldn't understand their fear. He had faced lions and bears in the fields while protecting his sheep. He knew the power of courage and faith. He knew that God was stronger than any giant. David's heart burned with a righteous anger. How could they let this giant defy the armies of the living God? How could they stand there paralyzed by fear while the Philistine mocked them day after day? This wasn't just about the Israelites and the Philistines, it was about God's honor. David knew what he had to do. He wouldn't stand by and watch while Goliath insulted God and his people. He wouldn't cower in fear. He would face this giant. He would trust in God's strength to deliver him. He knew in his heart that God would give him victory. David approached his brother Eliab, who was among the soldiers. "Eliab," he said, "I will fight this Philistine." Eliab turned to his younger brother, his face a mixture of shock and anger. "What are you talking about?" he hissed. "You're just a boy. Go back to your sheep and leave this to the warriors." Ignoring his brother's protests, David turned and walked towards the Israelite lines. He would face Goliath. He would show the Philistine giant and all who witnessed this day the power of the one true God. Word of David's bold declaration spread through the Israelite camp like wildfire. Soldiers whispered to each other, amazed by the courage of this young shepherd. Some scoffed at his naivety, while others looked on with a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Could this be the answer to their prayers? The commotion eventually reached King Saul. He was a seasoned warrior, but even he was daunted by Goliath's size and strength. He had almost resigned himself to defeat. When he heard about David, a young shepherd who dared to challenge the Philistine champion, he summoned him. Saul's advisors were skeptical. "Your Majesty," one of them cautioned, "this is just a boy. He's no match for Goliath. He'll be slaughtered." But Saul, desperate for any glimmer of hope, overruled them. "Bring him to me," he ordered. "I must see this shepherd boy for myself." David stood before King Saul. The king was a head taller than David, his face etched with years of worry and the burden of leadership. David, though young, carried himself with an air of quiet confidence. Saul looked at David, sizing him up. He saw a boy, barely old enough to shave, with bright eyes and a shepherd's tan. He couldn't imagine this boy facing the fearsome Goliath. "Are you sure about this, lad?" Saul asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Goliath is a giant among men. You're just a boy." "Your Majesty," David replied, his voice calm and steady, "I've faced lions and bears in the fields while protecting my father's sheep. God delivered me from their claws. He will deliver me from this Philistine too." David's faith shone in his eyes, unwavering and absolute. Saul was touched by David's faith, but he was still worried. He offered David his own armor, a heavy coat of mail, a bronze helmet, and a sword. He wanted to give the young shepherd every advantage. David tried on the king's armor, but it was too heavy, too cumbersome. He was used to the freedom of his shepherd's garb. He would face Goliath as he was, armed with his faith, his courage, and his shepherd's sling. "I cannot wear these," David said, removing the armor. "I am not used to them. I will go against this Philistine with what I know." He picked up his sling and a handful of smooth stones from the brook. He was ready. David held up his sling. It was a simple weapon made of leather and cord. He had used it countless times to protect his sheep from wolves and lions. In his hands, it was a deadly instrument. He had practiced with it since he was a boy. He could hit a bird on the wing from 100 paces. Saul watched David, a mixture of admiration and concern on his face. "You're going to face Goliath with that?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The king and his advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They had hoped for a miracle, but this seemed like madness. "Yes, Your Majesty," David replied calmly. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." He spoke with such quiet conviction that even the most skeptical onlookers fell silent. David strode toward the battlefield, his sling in hand, his steps light and sure. He felt no fear, only a deep sense of purpose. He was God's instrument, chosen to deliver his people. He approached the stream that flowed through the valley. He carefully selected 5 smooth stones from the water's edge. These were not just any stones, they were his weapons, chosen for their size and weight. He held them in his hand, feeling their coolness and their weight. The Israelite soldiers watched in stunned silence as David approached the Philistine lines. They couldn't believe that this young shepherd was actually going to face Goliath. Some whispered prayers, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Goliath saw David approaching and let out a roar of laughter. "Am I a dog," he bellowed, "that you come at me with sticks?" He was insulted that the Israelites would send a boy to fight him. He thought they were making a mockery of him. David stopped a short distance from Goliath, his gaze fixed on the giant. He looked small and insignificant compared to the towering Philistine, but his eyes shone with a power that belied his youth. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," David said in a clear, strong voice that carried across the battlefield, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel whom you have defied." Goliath laughed again, a deep booming sound that shook the ground. "This day I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the earth," he roared. David stood his ground. his eyes fixed on Goliath. He was not afraid. He knew that the battle belonged to the Lord. He had faced lions and bears with nothing but his sling and his faith, and he had emerged victorious. This battle was no different. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands, David proclaimed. His voice, though calm, rang with the power of his conviction. The air crackled with tension. The two armies watched in stunned silence as the young shepherd boy faced the Philistine giant. The fate of two nations rested on this unlikely confrontation, and in the heart of the valley, David, armed with his faith and his sling, prepared to face his destiny. David reached into his shepherd's bag and selected a smooth stone. It was cool and smooth against his calloused hand. This was no ordinary stone. It was a weapon of faith, guided by the hand of God. He placed it in the pouch of his sling and began to swing it, slowly at first, then faster and faster, the leather singing through the air. Goliath watched David's movements with amusement. He had expected a challenge, a real fight. This shepherd boy, armed with a child's toy, was an insult. He lowered his spear, ready to charge and crush the boy beneath his feet. He would make this quick. David steadied his aim, his eyes locked on the giant's forehead. He could see Goliath's every detail with unnatural clarity. He saw the giant's arrogance, his cruelty, his complete disregard for the power of God. He saw, too, the faintest glimmer of fear hidden deep within Goliath's eyes. With a final flick of his wrist, David released the stone. It shot from the sling with incredible force, a tiny projectile aimed at the giant's only weakness. The stone flew straight and true, propelled by the hand of God. It struck Goliath in the center of his forehead, sinking deep into the giant's flesh. The effect was instantaneous. Goliath's eyes widened in surprise, his arrogant laughter dying in his throat. The giant swayed, his massive frame suddenly unsteady on his feet. He raised his hand to his forehead, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. He had felt invincible, protected by his size and his armor. Yet here he was, brought down by a single stone, hurled by a shepherd boy. The Philistine army, watching in stunned silence, gasped as their champion stumbled. A wave of fear rippled through their ranks. They had placed their faith in Goliath's might, believing him to be invincible. Now their confidence crumbled along with their champion. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the valley. The Israelites, who had been cowering in fear moments before, watched in stunned silence. The Philistines, their arrogance shattered, stared in disbelief at their fallen champion. The silence was broken by a collective gasp as Goliath crashed to the ground. The earth trembled under his weight. The giant lay still, his reign of terror finally over. A cheer erupted from the Israelite lines, a joyous sound of relief and disbelief. They had witnessed a miracle, a victory not of might, but of faith. The God of Israel had triumphed over the Philistine giant. Their young champion, David, had faced their enemy and emerged victorious. David, his heart pounding, stood over the fallen giant. He looked down at the lifeless form, at the massive body that had once instilled such fear in the hearts of men. Now it lay still, defeated by a simple stone and the unwavering faith of a shepherd boy. David bent down and drew Goliath's own sword from its scabbard. He raised the heavy weapon, a symbol of the giant's defeated might, and with a swift stroke, severed Goliath's head. The Philistine champion, once a symbol of invincibility, was no more. The sight of their fallen leader, slain by the hand of the shepherd boy they had mocked, was more than the Philistine army could bear. Panic seized them. They turned and fled, their ranks breaking as they scrambled to escape the wrath of the Israelites and the God who had delivered them. The valley, moments ago filled with the dread of imminent defeat, now echoed with the joyous shouts of the victorious Israelite army. David, the young shepherd who dared to face the giant, was their unlikely hero. He had shown them the power of faith, the courage of a heart surrendered to God. The story of David and Goliath became a legend, passed down through generations. It became a beacon of hope for the oppressed, a testament to the power of faith to overcome even the most insurmountable obstacles. David, the shepherd boy who became a king, embodied the victory of the underdog, the triumph of right over might. The battle in the Valley of Elah resonated far beyond the borders of ancient Israel. It became a timeless parable, a story that transcended time and culture. It spoke of the power of courage to stand against injustice, the audacity to challenge the status quo, the unwavering belief in a power greater than ourselves. This story, told and retold throughout the ages, reminds us that even the smallest among us can achieve extraordinary things when we place our trust in God. It reminds us that true strength lies not in physical prowess, but in the courage of a faithful heart. David's victory over Goliath continues to inspire us to face our own giants, knowing that with God on our side, nothing is impossible.